Let me share my screen. So yeah, we were in the usage of model class now, right? So in model class, first what we'll have to do is now the first step is to prepare the data. Now here you don't have to use something called adapters, right? Now or which we used to use like commands or any separate connections, right? We don't have to exclusively do everything or reading data now actually, right? You just have to actually make sure that how you actually want to feed the data into database. Now, how do we need to is like that is how we normally create our model classes initially, right? The user ID name we have. Now, these two will be using in order to map the data in user ID and name columns. Now, the same thing here. What we are doing is we are actually using the students class, right? And we are creating a normal object here. And whatever data we have to feed, right, we have actually created. First step is that we are ready with the data which we have to feed into the table. Now, the next step is how we actually access the database and actually insert the data. Now here, as I said, so if you remember this dialect, right, the one which we actually seen in a previous class called SQL dialect. Now here, we were just saying that you can actually create an object, feed the data what you want in here. But normally, if you take an example, in the case of JDBC, we have to create a dynamic SQL, the bigger SQL on the flow, right? And then we have to follow some steps to create a connection, right? Create a data, driver managers and all, right? And commands are executing that and all, right? But here, the query, internally Hibernate will actually generate its own query based on the pattern you have defined in your entity class called students. Now, what is the type of SQL it has to generate? We'll have to mention that in something called dialect property. Now, this dialect property will actually mention that okay, this is the database on which I'm going to run the query, because each and every database has a database will have a few things specific to some database vendors, right? In MySQL or Microsoft SQL, the some pattern of running SQL is different when compared to Oracle database or Sybase or any database if you can take up, right? That is the reason why Hibernate API, which is core Hibernate API, will have all the internal dialect SQL patterns you have. You can see here, which I have already shown you, which is Hibernate or you have something called dialect. Here you can see all the data types, whatever are there in market, right? You have each and every API class being embedded in Hibernate. If there is any new database coming up, it will actually give up a new job. You can see that Oracle will have from 9 to 10 all the support of this. Same way you have even MySQL, which is a SQL server. You have 2005, 2008 and all, right? And if you want to use a latest database, right? Let's say it's 2012, version of database running now, right? Then in that case, you can use these dialects, but there may be some changes which are newly implemented and they may not work. That is one thing which you have to remember, right? Because but you can actually use these dialects for different databases. And there is one more thing that, let's say we got a new Hibernate API or new Hibernate binaries, and in that Hibernate binary it actually supports 2012 of SQL Server, right? And if you copy that dialect over here, partially it will work, but there won't be complete support of Hibernate. You have to change the complete binaries of your Hibernate in order to work completely, because this dialect is not only the one which you have, right? This is for simple queries, let's say, but you can see the dialect is there for so many things. It has for your functions, right? Your locking things or uniqueness to maintain a single session. There are so many things, right? Which means pertaining to there can be 100 different places where you may have to cheat. So that is the reason why always just check whether you have got particular database class here or not. If you don't have, then obviously you have. Yeah, Dila?
Your voice is breaking a lot, so I can't hear you at all.
Okay, so that is about dialect actually. So based on the data which we actually map, right? Based on that, it will actually create the dialect queries and it will run the first step. Now, the second step which we have already seen, query part is something this will actually take care. And the next part is that, like what database and what are the different parameters we have, like IP, port, and all. Now here, in our database connection settings, we have already given these properties. Remember that these property names should be same, right? So these are some standards which Hibernate actually use internally to read the property and map that to the parameters internally for different things. Now you can see here, if you actually make use of connection.url, right, it will actually take it as connection URL, right, to actually find out the database name, database port if you have, database network credentials and all, right? I can see the connection username, which is database username, and password, different things. Now, internally, you don't have to actually call each and every property and exclusively create any connection or anything. You have two important classes in Hibernate which you can use directly. The first thing is that session factory. Now, this session factory is nothing but configuration which you're actually using here. In one session factory, you can have one database connection settings where whenever you actually get your connections settings here, right, which is your session factory, you can actually create a session out of it, right? Now in my session factory, I have a database connections defined. Now when I say, so how can I get this configuration is using this. My session factory API class here, because session factory is something which is under Hibernate package. So this is something which is an interface actually. So I cannot create an object of session factory directly. Instead, what I can do is I can actually get the things directly from my configuration stuff. So configuration is something which will actually map to this configuration. And whatever database settings you have defined, right, that it will actually get the complete session factory to it. This is the first step, that you are getting the details into the session factory. And whenever you say from session factory, you can actually get one session, which means you are actually making an internal database connection using your Hibernate. When you say session factory.open session, right, it will actually connect to database and will give you one session to it, which means this is same as the connection which we had in our JDBC, right? You will get a complete object over here. You should not say it as a connection object. This is something which is a session object, which means you are ready to actually perform some operations in it. This is the next step you have in your session. Now, once you are actually done with this, if you don't get any sort of error, right, and obviously you can move ahead, because if any one step fails, then you'll have to actually kill the program there itself, right? Until unless your factory settings or session factory is ready, you can't create a session. Until unless your session is ready, you can't actually do some transaction or do any sort of DML operation on that, right? Again, it's interdependent based on our which is same as a JDBC, as we have said, right? Now this will actually give an active socket connection, right? Which means you can actually create any number of sessions you want, which will actually make it as a unique session to the database. A separate connection will be made using different ports in your local. Now, once you are done with session, right, then you'll be going to update the data, whatever data we want to feed into database. Now, for that, we normally say we say begin transaction, where I want to add different thing to database. Now, whatever object you have created, right, you can just say a save. Your session.save. Now, when you say save, right, now this object will be automatically mapped, which means this class will be automatically mapped with one of the configuration mapping model classes, right? And one of the mapping model classes, whenever it maps, right, it knows that this entity class is actually referring to this database, right? And it will actually go for this database. And as we are using a create command in our startup, right? So if it is a create, which means the existing database will be dropped and the new database table, right? New database table called students_data will be created internally, where your student ID and student name will be two different columns in that database, right? So once it is done, then what happens is, like, so this is something which will actually take care of two things, like execution, creation of command. I'm talking about internal to this session when you just say save, right? So all these things which you used to do in our JDBC, right, will be taken care by one single method actually. Only thing is that you have to make sure each and every parameter have got its own getters and setters, because your model class will actually get the data. This mapping model class will get the data using your getters of each and every column. This is very important. So that is why I said you can define your column and ID at parameter level, or you can define your annotations at property level too. right? I can just give it as a username, sorry, username here and user ID here. Get user ID, right? So you can go ahead with creating any way. So both the ways work in the same, right? Now normally why do we use at column level here is that if you want to sometimes what do we need to do is sometimes we have to append data column names parallelly with some let's say prefix or suffix. Let's say whenever I want to add any column name, right? I want to add column name with TBL, which is table. Normally we say table, or for columns we go for CLN and column name, right? If you want to append it, you can append it any time because they are everything is something which is your properties over here, right? So that is how you create an object and we actually map them. And once you are done with mapping, right, then you'll have to do a commit over here, which is commit which is same as JDBC commit here. Now this transaction once you begin, then you have to commit over here. Now you have two things I have written here. Either you can commit, or after a few checks, if you don't want to commit, let's say this save, let's say I'm actually keeping everything in here, right? I'm actually keeping things here, right? Let's say if there is an exception, right? Maybe I just want to roll back the things. You can call rollback over at the exception. That I don't want to do any of these things. I just want to roll back the things. Now, this is how we normally go ahead and actually do a simple Hibernate operation for a model table. And once you are done with that, let's say I have a session here dot, you have something called close, right? Always do this because you can see here when I go to close, right, you can see the connection, right? It will actually be disposed. Now after session is done, then go for your session factory dot, you have something called close. This will be closed. Normally we'll have to keep it at finally. Never ever keep anything inside your try catch, because if anything goes wrong, right, then there may be something which go null. So always go ahead and do this. So you have your session factory with you and you have your session with you. Let's say null here and remove this part. And once you are done with this, then keep these things at your file. Sorry. Now, once you are done with this session, okay. So once you keep things in finally, right, always try to look at, as I said, always check whether the objects are null or not. This is very important. If it is not null, then only just go ahead with creation of different things. Again, if your session factory is not equal to null, then go ahead with closing of your session. Now this will actually give you a very perfect clearing of your connections and everything, so that one DML operation will actually complete your things here, right? So in the same way, if you want to iterate things, right, you can actually keep in loop. Either you can keep in a same session, creation of different objects, and you can continuously save and commit operations directly, as like, let's say I'm actually creating for loop here, and let's say these objects I'm going to create it inside this. Let's say I'm gonna take this outside this, right? And let's say here user ID, I have I here, right? Just say set name, I'm just appending with something, right? John1, John2 and all, right? Now here, so I'm just saying opening session once, I'm actually begin transaction, right? I'm actually okay, sorry, you have to keep this begin transaction at your before transaction commit. So every time I begin transaction, I save an object. If there is no error, I'm actually getting back and committing it. Going back again, right? You can just give your, let's say I want to add some 10 different objects. And Now in this way you can go ahead. Now once you're done with completely, now you can see that we have actually created one session. Now in this one session we are doing everything we want, right? As we have seen in our connections, right? You can create one connection, and on that connection you can create any number of commands, right? You can create any number of SQL commands, you can run them, execute them, and once all the DML operations of different exclusive queries are done, right, finally you can actually kill the session. There we used to kill the command, and then we used to kill the connection. Here we have to kill the session, which is a single session of the database which you have mentioned in the Hibernate configuration, and then close the session factory, and this closing is till this opening session which you have done. Now this is how we normally do DML operation in our Hibernate using the object model which we have in Hibernate. Now this is important, which is a mapping class. Now whatever mapping you have done, right, it will be automatically, it will actually save, it will actually get the signature of this class or the object which we gave here, and based on this object it will actually map the mapping class here, and then it will create an object, and based on the entities whatever we defined, right, different columns and all, it will actually map each and every value to the database columns. Now this is how the normal thing works, right? If you have any new upgrade you have to do in your for your project, right, then you have to check whether you have the database direct class for that upgrade of your database. If you don't have, then you'll have to go either for the latest version of Hibernate on, or you'll have to actually check the same direct class for all the DMLs which you have used in your project. That is very important. Now if you're actually going ahead with the without any upgrade of anything, right, and if it is a normal daily routine that you will be using same database and all, that's fine. But if there is any upgrade, then you'll have to make sure that you have a support of that corresponding direct class in your Hibernate to support whatever database you are going to use. Fine, so that is one thing which we have to make sure.